story of Oedipus the king, Oedipus Rex. This is a famous picture often put on the covers of this. I don't have that one here. But this is the picture of Oedipus sitting down here like a gentleman. And on the plinth here is a Sphinx telling him a riddle. So it's a scene from that. I think this is on an amphora, which is a clay water pitcher type thing. But the story of Oedipus. The story of Oedipus is a tragedy. We just looked at an epic by the famous Homer, as I said, telling of the story of the Battle of Troy, which is about 1200 BC, probably written by Homer somewhere around 800 BC, written in its final version, or at least an authoritative version is probably decided about 600 BC. 200 years later, we have Athens, the great city of Athens, the one where Plato and Aristotle and Socrates live, where basically the great age of Greece is at hand. Athens is the primary city. They have fought against the Persians who believed that human beings were slaves and that only the Babylonian king was a son of the gods and therefore to be revered. And so he treats them as his slaves. He will call them slaves. He regards himself as not of their nature, will do with them whatever he wants. A lot there like the Egyptian religion, by the way. Pharaoh, again, one of the gods, revered as a god. Same in the Greco-Roman world. There's this gulf between the various individuals there, and no sense that you can climb the ladder either. You cannot become a king if you're not of noble birth. Everyone would revolt against it. It's unjust. Just not possible. The idea of upward mobility is just alien to them. No. And but in this era, in the era of Athens, it's the era of the tragedies, the great tragedians, and there are three of them. One by the name of, let's see here, Aeschylus, the first one, with an A-E. Am I going to pull this all down? Probably. But I'll do it anyway. And Euripides. And this man, Sophocles. These three writers are considered the three great tragedians of the age. In fact, they're considered the classics. The term classics, by the way, which we use for classical music and the classical period, it actually comes, the term comes from the period between the death of Alexander the Great and the beginning of the Roman Empire. So the Hellenic period. There are teachers that describe a good curriculum for education, and it includes a study of the classics. And these three tragedians are considered among the classics. There's also those who write epics, Homer and Hesiod, and various other poets. This is what you want to read to be educated. So not just the epic, but certain other types of genres. These will be called the classics. By them. Yes? Gymnasium, or gymnasium, sorry. Yes, it is. And the gymnasium is a certain type of learning. In German, they still use it. They call it Gymnasium. That's why I referred to that. But it's a gymnasium. And we associate the gym with physical athletic training. Well, that's because part of the education was that. But another part was learning in this sort. And in case you want to add a little bit of spice to it, the word gymnos means naked. There you go. You never thought you'd get that here. But yes, the gymnasium. Now, it didn't mean they were naked all the time, but when they did athletic games, they were. They competed in that way. Only men, by the way. the Olympian Games and so forth. So they were oiled up, and that's how this took place. By the way, in the gymnasium, there are no women. They don't go to the gym. I'm talking about, this is Greece, ancient Greece. Yes?
So what's the spelling of the second name?
Euripides. E-U-R. Sorry, there's a, yes, E-U-R. These are the three great Athenian tragedians, and the tragedy is a certain type of literature. It's a play, and it's a public performance, and it's a performance dedicated to the gods, and the god that it's dedicated to is a particular god. Anyone know which god it was dedicated to? Yes? Yes. Yes, or Dionysus, who is the god also called Bacchus, B-A-C-C-H-U-S, god of wine, god of poetry, appropriate to this, mirth and merriment. He has a certain lineage. He's a late comer, not one of the Olympian gods. This is characteristic of the polytheistic Greeks and Romans and so forth. They're happy to add a god into the mix. Oh, I haven't heard about that god. We'll add that god in. They're happy to add Jesus to the pantheon of gods, by the way. Sure, you can worship that god as well, as long as you worship Caesar. Then you can have as many gods in there as you want. So the problem for the early Christians is not that they call Jesus God, but they say that he alone is God. That's the challenge. It's not just worshiping God, it's that there are no other gods. That's they're claiming exclusivity. This and this alone is God. There is no other name. It says explicitly in Scripture, there is no other name under heaven and earth. So it's saying all the other gods are false gods then, ipso facto. Anyway, back to this. The games in which these tragedies took place were games, just like the Olympian Games are for athletics. We have the modern Olympics. We know about those. That was only revived in 1892, by the way. The Olympian Games were gone for over 2,000 years. They were brought back in the late Victorian period. Competitions between nation states and so forth, which we know them as now. But these were festivals nonetheless, and those were dedicated to the Olympian gods, the Olympics. Hence, this is a festival for Bacchus. And at this festival, prizes were awarded, first prize and so forth. But the festivals are dedicated to a god who is killed, Bacchus, torn apart, and then is reborn again, associated with all sorts of Bacchic revelries. And so a lot of drinking and a lot of revelry, like New Year's Eve. A lot of excess around this. And tragedies are performed at this. Now, some people think that the word tragedy comes from the paraphernalia that were worn at the time. And tragic actors wore heels. When they went around the stage, it would clop, clop like goat hooves. So tragos maybe is a goat song. And a tragedy, and of course Bacchus and the satyrs, they have hooves as well. You remember in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, there's the faun. He's got hoofs and so forth. But tragic actors have these heels on, and they're making a shuffling, and there's a bit of a choric element. They actually have a chorus in front of them. I'll show you the amphitheater there in a second. But there's a sort of a ritualistic and a dance component to it while they're talking. So it's very much seems like a performance on multiple levels. Did you have a question at the back? I ignored it. Yes, please.
So in terms of like wearing the heels and like the click-clack, like why? Like what's the? Okay.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Part of the cycle of this, and I can't remember if it's in here, it talks about strophe and antistrophe and apode and so forth. I don't think it's in the translation here. But strophe is a turn, and then an antistrophe is a turn in the other direction. So they're dancing around in one direction, and then they go back in the other direction, and there's an apode. So there's a sort of a swaying and a movement that goes with it. And again, it's like a dance as much as a theatrical performance. Another complexity to it, which might surprise you, is that they all wear masks. Yes. That's what I'm suggesting. You ever seen these sorts of masks? These are the tragic masks. Tragic theater. Comedy and tragedy. They both wear masks. Very hard for us to understand or even accept that actors wear masks. We associate actors with, you recognize that person's face. And an actor is not only recognizable by their face, they're recognizable by their beautiful appearance usually. Like they've got a look. And you want to see the person's face. You can't see their faces, these actors. They totally depend on their voices. And the mask helps them with that. Because the mask helps them to amplify their voices, right? Do you hear? I'm not speaking any more loudly. But you can hear me, right? That's because this is what the mask does. It's an acoustic instrument. So is this. This is where they perform their theatrical events, in an amphitheater. Now these are so well constructed that they exist to this very day. These are outdoor theaters. Now you can imagine if you've ever been outdoors how easy it is for sound to go. They don't have amplification. They don't have speakers. They don't have electronic equipment to amplify. All they have is their voices. Now you can raise your voice and project. And you can project pretty well, but there's a limit to what you can do. But if you add to this, and you can speak loud, like I can raise, okay. But in addition, the acoustics of this theater amplifies the voice. So you can hear somebody down here on the stage at the very top because of the structure of the stonework and the design of it. And these were performances, and you can see it will seat huge numbers. And it works to this very day. You can hear a pin drop on stage, not quite, but it's that, the acoustics are that good. Now if you are a performer, musician, whatever, challenges with acoustics. The ceiling and the floors, everything can suck up the sound or amplify or make it echo. This doesn't echo, but it does allow amplification, and so does the mask. So with that in mind, and the fact that this is performance, now if you're up here in the nosebleed section, you're not going to see anything anyway. There's nothing to see. It's not a spectacle in that sense. It is an acoustic event. You're there to hear the words of the tragedy. Right? I mean, look, you can see people down there, but they're little dots. Here's another one, a little bit better. This is Epidaurus. But again, you can see a person all the way down here, photo from up there, there's nothing to see. You're not going to see their face. But if you have a mask on, you might have like a character study in the face. This person is represented by that mask. But we're listening to the words of the actor. And so there's a connection here in Greek theater. Now, Aristotle, the famous philosopher, says that of all of the forms of literature, the tragedy is the greatest. Not the epic, but the tragedy. And note that he can't see anything that's happening there. He can't see it, but he hears it. And the meaning of the story is part of the greatness of the story. I said I had an interesting picture here. I think it's interesting. It's interesting to me. Let's see if I can reduce it a little bit. This is called a theatron, the word from which we get theater. Theatron has to do with the verb to see. Theatro is a verb. So it is a place where you go to see, but there's nothing to see, per se, because at least you can't see the faces. You can see other things, but actually you're there to hear. And there are places that are where we have the so-called orchestra. It's called the orchestra in Greek, by the way, where we get the word. There's also a place called the scene, the parados, the throne of the priest of Dionysus in the front. So it's literally dedicated to the god Dionysus, and the priest's there. And the priest is being propitiated by the performance in front of him. And what's happening on the stage is a scene of tragedy and horror. Why would a god be happy with that? Well, because the god himself is going to be torn apart. And there's a celebration going on. So it's associated with a certain type of experience of life that the god speaks to and looks after. But these words, and the stage here gets developed over the course of time. At first there's only one actor on stage, and eventually, under the time of Sophocles, there's 3 actors on stage at one point. At first there's only individuals speaking, and so very much connecting with the word. And human nature then connected with speaking and performance and even a mask. Very interesting, because the word for mask in Latin is persona. A persona. We use that in theater in other sense. A persona is a mask you put on, right? This is my public persona. Yes?
So these gods aren't seen as like immortal. They have the ability to die.
Well, this particular one, yeah, but he comes back. So,
Oh.
yeah, gods don't really ever die.
Okay.
But he gets torn apart. And there are certain specific features of that which anthropologists are very interested in. If you want to look into this a little bit, have a look at René Girard. And he will talk about scapegoating and a ritualistic sacrifice of somebody for the body public, and he will connect it then with Christian theology and so forth. It's interesting. This is an anthropological point here, but yes?
Who plays the part of the women in these plays?
Men.
In the audience, could it be a mixed gender? Or
Yes.
only men?
No, they could mix, yeah. They didn't want women on stage. Not quite sure why exactly. Not quite sure why. Other than theaters have always been associated with immorality, and you can see why. The god of the Dionysus, it's drunkenness and sexual orgies. We don't really want our women folk there. Why are the men there? Because it's a part of life and the god needs to be propitiated. But you don't want to ruin your reputation by being in the presence of this. But the men, you ought to go because it teaches you something important and profound about life.
But the women would go as well, right?
I'm not sure about it. I don't think so. When you come to the Elizabethan period in Shakespeare, it's a place of disrepute. The prostitutes go. They hang out in the theaters. That's why the Puritans wanted the theater shut down. It wasn't just because of what was going on stage. It was because what was going on off stage, backstage, around the stage. There were places where people would go and, again, consume alcohol and then fornication and children out of wedlock. So they were trying to cut down on that. It wasn't just objecting to what happened on the stage, but note that it entices that sort of behavior. Anyway, other comments or questions? So let me come to discussion of this. Have I skipped over it and taken this out of place? I think I have taken it out of my own. I most certainly have. So I don't even have my notes here. So we'll go without notes. So I said that Aristotle said that the tragedy is the greatest literary form or genre. The ideas of genres is a post-Alexandrian designation. They come up with the term classics. They came up with the term critics. They come up with the idea that the criticism of poetry is a way of educating, of paideia, not just the epic, but all of the forms of literature, all the different genres. They also come up with the idea that, and amplifying on what Aristotle says, that of all of the tragedies ever written, this one that we're reading is the greatest of them all. Aristotle says that Oedipus the King is the great tragedy. I said there are 3 tragedians that are considered to be part of the classical repertoire, but of all of the plays, this one is the one that Aristotle mentions. Says it's perfect. It hits all the right notes. So why? What's so good about this? What is it that makes this so important that he says it's basically it's the greatest work of art ever constructed? Do you have a comment or a question? No.
I was going to say, maybe because it's more complex than a bad thing happens to a bad person. Instead, it's more like a bad thing happens to a good person.
Is he a good person?
Yeah, no, there's that. Is he really a good person?
What do you call somebody who commits incest and murders his father? Is that a good person?
Albeit unknowingly.
Oh, he didn't know it, so that makes it okay. So here's the complexity, right? You're right. He didn't know it. It's more than that. He tried to avoid it. And when he found out that it happened, he said, I'm going to get the person who did this and bring him to justice. So this isn't just a good man, a man committed to justice, a man who we're going to find is a prophet. He solves the riddle of the Sphinx. But he is a good man who's actually the worst man you can imagine. So and Aristotle says this tragedy says something profound about human nature. Now, it's almost a theological statement because there's so much complexity. What do you mean? What do you mean it says something about human nature? There's somebody who thinks that they're good, we think is good, and yet is as bad as it can possibly be. What is true about human nature there? Yes?
Plus, I think part of the complex of like Oedipus is the fact that he was so fearful of his, like knowing his destiny that he literally like tried to leave like the city and stuff. But yet that fear, it was like misguided, and he still ended up fulfilling like what he was so scared of, like a self.
Everybody did. Well, right. And why? What led him to believe that he could evade it? Well, what led his parents to that? Because his parents, having heard the prophecy, tried to and did everything they could to make it not happen. So this is what was said. And can you avoid fate? Is it possible? According to the Greeks, it's not possible. So this adds complexity to it. Because in our theology, we like to think that our choices matter, and we're not just, we're not fatalists. That you can do things that will effectively change situations. There's free will is something we value, conscience and so forth. It doesn't seem to matter here. Here's a man with a very sharp conscience, wants to avoid evil at all costs. Will go to any length to punish the bad man. He's going to abuse the prophet when he tells him the truth. He's going to abuse him for it. By the way, that prophet, what was his name?
Same guy that Odysseus went to go see.
Yes. Whose name was? Tiresias. Yes. And what do we know about Tiresias?
He's blind.
He is blind. Okay. He is blind. The blind prophet Tiresias. Okay. Odysseus went down to consult with him. He told him how to get back, and everything turned out well. So he has a good reputation. He's an epic reputation for telling the truth. Even the great Odysseus consulted with him in the underworld. By the way, when he consulted with him, he was already a reviled figure. It's clear in the Odyssey because it mentions Thebes and the nasty deeds that happened there. So he has a sort of a spotty reputation in the sense he's down there as having done this, but he still tells the truth, and he's in the underworld. And again, I said to you that often prophecy comes from below in the ancient world. They consult the dead and so forth. The mediums, just like the Witch of Endor does, they're doing bad stuff, seances and mediums and palm readers and all that same sort of stuff that never goes away. They're not saying that no knowledge comes from there, by the way, either. You do get something, but it is wicked, and don't do it. Why? If they actually are going to tell you something that is accurate. I'll just leave the question unanswered. It's forbidden. It's forbidden to do this. Do not consult with a medium. Very popular in our day. Very popular. It's the realm of the demonic. Very popular. People do it for a reason. Tiresias is the blind man who's famous as a prophet. Here is where he gets his fame. Before the Odyssey, because this episode happens before the telling of the Odyssey. Because he's in the underworld in the Odyssey. He's not yet in the underworld. This man's still alive. He doesn't come back from the dead. He's still alive. So this takes place before Troy. This is an ancient legend. It's an ancient story. So ancient that everybody knows the story. Homer knows the story. It's an infamous story. Of course he knows the story. It's a story of incest and patricide. Those are stories that don't go away. The whole city of Thebes is associated with it. The guilt of the act. That's how heinous it's seen. It's abhorrent. But he, although he is blind, he speaks the truth. Now, whereas the man who can see, the man who solves the riddle of the Sphinx, what is the riddle of the Sphinx, once again? It's right here at the beginning of the story. Actually, it's even before the story takes place, but it's recounted to us. Because by this point, he's the king of the city, and the Sphinx has been dealt with before. What's the Sphinx's riddle? Sure.
It had to do with, like, I'm paraphrasing, can't remember specifically.
It's okay.
Something like crawling.
Yes,
and then
yes.
being able to,
So what walks on 4
Yeah.
in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 in the evening?
Yeah.
And the answer is nobody knows. Nobody can answer the riddle. And the Sphinx is destroying the city. Why is he destroying the city? Because the god Apollo is outraged at the city. Why is the god Apollo outraged at the city? Not exactly clear, other than that the king has just been murdered. The king's been murdered, and nobody has done anything to avenge it. The king's been murdered. The god Apollo is destroying the city of Thebes for this. Why is the city of Thebes being? Because to kill a king is to kill one of the godlike. How dare you? Except that the ambiguity here, of course, is it was fated that the king be killed anyway. But still, you've killed the king, so you're morally guilty for it. And you haven't sought to find out the person who did it. So you, the city, are guilty, complicit in that, and the city is being destroyed for this heinous act. Along comes, what's the answer to the riddle? A man, a human being. Baby, crawling in the morning, 2 legs at noon, stands upright, 3 legs in the evening, got a cane to assist, like hunched over, not so. And moreover, probably sight failing. That person described is Oedipus as well. There's a lot of depth in this. When we first hear about Oedipus, Oedipus, they sound so similar. We're told about his account of him as a baby. In fact, they so much want to get rid of the baby that they drive a spike through his ankles to string him up. Right? He's not going to be able to walk properly the rest of his life. He's going to be sort of hobbling. They stick it through him, and they give the baby, his mother and father, they don't want to kill their own baby. They're kings and queens. It's grisly business. They give it to a shepherd and say, go dispose of the child. Get rid of, because that baby is going to murder dad and have children with mom. We're not having that. So you get rid of that baby. He goes and takes the baby away, and the shepherd has compassion on the little baby, gives it to another shepherd and says, you go away and never come back. Don't let your face be seen here. He's then taken to that city, which is Corinth, and brought up by none other than the king and the queen. It's a bit like Moses. Brought up in the king's household of another city, grows up as their child. Do they know? Does he know that they're not mom and dad? No, they never tell him. They raise him as their own. But people do. The rumors are about. And somebody comes up to him and says, you know, you're a bastard. And he gets furious. Like, that's outside of wedlock, all the scandal associated with it. He hits the guy, furious. He goes to consult with the Delphic oracle. The oracle gives him a little cryptic answer that leads him down another path, and he's being orchestrated back. By the way, the Delphic oracle is the oracle of Apollo as well. Delphi, famous oracle, the one that Socrates consults as well. The most famous oracle of the ancient world. Apollo is the one who's so angry, destroying the city of Thebes. The Delphic oracle tells him what Apollo wants him to hear. And he sends him to fulfill what was fated. He's going to go back. He leaves mom and dad in Corinth, goes back on the road just to get away, so he's such a good man, he wants to make sure he doesn't somehow kill his father and somehow impregnate his mother. I don't know how that would be possible. But he's going to do his best, his utmost to avoid it. On the road, as it turns to Thebes, he's at a crossroads and he meets a man up on his high horse, on his carriage, and the man insults him because in the road, and he hits him, strikes him with he's got a staff or something, hits him in the back of the head. Oedipus, being a strong man, reaches up and hits him. He hits him so hard he kills him. One punch. That's a big hit. Knocks him down, the man falls dead. He has no idea who the man is. But when he gets to Thebes, he finds that they have no king. Just recently, they lost their king. Oh. And even worse than that, there's this beast called a Sphinx that's destroying the city with a plague. Destroying the city for this heinous act. And it's got a riddle, and nobody can solve the riddle, and so the city is being decimated. And he solves the riddle, and they are so grateful to them, they say, you should be our king. He looks around and he sees the queen and says, I don't know, there's something familiar about you, but yeah.
Is there a chorus within
Sorry.
I can never say his
There
name.
is a chorus in the orchestra.
Oh, more like
In the orchestra pit here, they don't have musical instruments. They have the chorus, and they're literally called the chorus, and they speak here. And they represent probably the body politic. They're the common people. They're speaking on behalf. And they are expressing common sense in the play. But common sense can be deceived. So they will change their tune over the course of time. At first, they love Oedipus. They're on his side. So it's illustrating something about the relation between a person's reputation and the public acclaim, and how the public is often wrong in their estimation of the public figure as well.
like a voice of reason, basically.
Yeah, it's something like that.
Okay.
Except it's not very reasonable. It's just, it's the public. The public, he's popular. How can he not be popular? He's solved the riddle of the Sphinx. He stopped the killing. He's a good man. Time has passed when the new problems ensue in Thebes, because since that time, that sort of ancient history, Oedipus has had children with Jocasta, his queen, who's also his mother, but he doesn't know that. He's had children, and now Apollo is outraged, and now there's the stain, or the miasma is the word in Greek, of guilt has so offended Apollo that he wants it expiated. He wants it gone. It's so heinous. The whole city is the stench. He wants it cleaned up. And so he's destroying the city again. So it began with the Sphinx, but now is Apollo destroying it through a plague. Yes?
Yeah, and this is something about the queen because how she didn't try to find out how the husband died. She just moved out immediately. And this is something about her.
She was pretty quick.
Yeah.
You want me to comment on that? It depends on the nature of the city and of the country.
Sir, could you please reiterate the question?
The question is that that Jocasta married a little quickly. Husband was murdered, the king, she's the queen. You know, a guy traipses into town. Yeah, he solves the riddle, and he's the sort of he looks good. He reminds me a bit of my ex-husband. I'm not sure what it is about. Yeah, I sort of like the look of him, and but why is she married so quickly? It might be because in Thebes there's no hereditary monarchy, and so somebody else can move into the place of the king. It might be that the queen has no status outside of a king, and it might also be that her sons are at risk from somebody coming in then as well. So she might want to marry quickly to retain the legitimacy of her own offspring. Like these are her other children. I don't know exactly. We're not told. And it doesn't matter in one sense. I mean, you might want to know, but for the purposes of the story, it's irrelevant. I mean, there's a lot of complexity to the story already. Everything that isn't essential to the telling of the story, they just leave unanswered. Within the story, you might find it in other myths and legends amplified. Just like in the story of the Odyssey or the Iliad, how does the city of Troy fall? Through the Trojan horse. Not mentioned in the Iliad. How does Achilles die? Shot through the heel. Not mentioned in the Iliad. Not mentioned in the Odyssey. It's not there. It's outside of those. There are myths and legends that grow up around the epics. The figures are so famous, but they're even in the most famous representations of it contain details that we get from peripheral stories. So I don't know the answer here, but it's not important to Sophocles. Just not important to him because it distracts. And again, a good storyteller will not tell you every detail you want to know. They'll tell you what's essential for the telling of the tale. And the tale here is centered around a man who is better than us. This is what Aristotle says is one of the prime features of a tragedy. The hero has to be a man who is superior to us, either through his birth rank or through his character or through his intelligence or whatever. He has to be better than us. You noticed he was a good man. You're right. He's not just good, he's better than us. The reason why he needs to be so is because for us to have a sense of the tragedy, we have to have a sense of the fall of the man. And the fall, if it's somebody who's born in poverty and had life against him, we don't really sense, you just think, yeah, that you feel sorry for him, but you don't have a sense of a fall because he was already down. He began down, he stayed down, he never got up. Here's a man who was way up. He was revered by his people, and yet he falls as far as a man can fall, where he's reviled. In fact, he's so bad he can't even look at himself. He digs out his eyes. Digs out his eyes. So the man who can see, the man who solves the riddle of the Sphinx, ends up going off stage with a cane blind. He blinds himself. The blind man can see, and the man who can see has ended up blinded. So there's a reversal there. There's a lot of symmetry in the plot, a lot of parallelism. And in this, again, one of the things being asserted is justice. Once again, the gods are doing the just thing. Is it not just to punish incest and patricide and the murder of a king? Is this not just? Should the gods not avenge these sorts of things? We've already seen they get angry with the murder of Agamemnon. This can't stand. We can't have somebody who bears the image of the gods being murdered. If we let this go, there will be no justice anywhere. We'll be like Polyphemus, the Cyclops. Everyone acting on their own. There's no community. There's no standards. There's no hospitality. I mean, nothing. We have to keep order here. So the gods are punishing injustice. This is a play about justice, just like the Odyssey was. A great injustice has happened. The gods will punish it. But this figure of Oedipus is and this is Aristotle's description, is a hero, and a tragic hero has to be better than us. So he's an aristocrat, one of the best. That's what aristos means, by the way. It means the best. Krat means he has the power. Democrat is the people, the demos, the mob, has the power. In aristocracy, it's the best that have the power. Sometimes the word the best there is a little bit ironic. They're born noble, but they don't act very nobly. But it should not be so. It should be that the aristocrats actually are the best. And that is the expectation of Aristotle, that be the case as well. So this is a work of art presented by Sophocles, and I think it perfectly combines form and content. The discovery of his illegitimacy is only a part of the story. The real story is the injustice. That's at the heart of this, and also I think the riddle around human nature. I think there's a huge amount of attention played to the riddle of human nature in this. This is why I think Aristotle thinks it's so great. The riddle of the Sphinx we've already touched upon. There's a further riddle here, and it's contained in the name of the character, Oedipus. If you know any Greek, and I suspect most of you do not, Oedipus. Something Oedipus is a play on his foot, puss the feet, swollen foot. You could also see it, though, it's playing on the Greek verb to know. Oedipus is the one who claims knowledge. But what does he know? Does he even know who he is? He thinks he knows who he is. He claims to be the son of the king and queen of Corinth. But he is not the son of the king and queen of Corinth. He's the son of the king and queen of Thebes. He has no idea. He doesn't even know who he is. So the man who solves the riddle of the Sphinx is oblivious to his own nature. And his own nature is an illustration of our nature. I think Aristotle thinks this is one of the main reasons why this tragedy is so profound. Maybe I'm reading into it a little bit. But it's a profoundly philosophical tragedy. If it's raising the question of human nature, and modern scientists think that they know everything about us. Everybody's so clever now. You know, here's where we came from in anthropology, the early origins of human beings, and where the scientific progress and modern science means that we're far superior in our wisdom and understanding of the world than the ancients were. Here's my question. Can a human being know what a human being is? Can a human being tell us the entire nature of a human being? What's the problem with objectivity? If you're doing an experiment on human nature, trying to discover what it is, what's the problem with your experiment? Oh, you didn't say. Bias. 100%. 100%. You're involved in the investigation, just from the scientific method. You have to be objective. How can you be objective when the subject that you're looking at is you? Are you going to be truthful in what you see, or are you going to be blinded to some degree? Are you going to tell the whole truth about yourself and nothing but the truth? Are you even able to see it? modern science, the psychology and anthropology, sociology, all of these social sciences, the human sciences, call themselves sciences, but they contradict the very tenets of science in the fact that they lack objectivity on this thing. Now, it's not a rebuke to them in a sense. Nobody else knows either. It's something that has to be told to you from an objective source, and that objective source is, for Christians, it's God reveals to us, because we're his creatures. They don't know because they don't even think that human beings are made in the image of God. We know better. Or at least God reveals us, and Christians act in accordance with that belief that is so. But this is the fundamental anti-scientific basis of the human sciences that are presented as all-knowing and all-wise in our day. I think it's deeply problematic. It's an obvious failure on their part, and they won't even acknowledge it. How come? Pride, among other things, vanity, lust for power. We can go on. Yes?
Proverbs 20:24 says, "A man's steps are from the Lord. How then can man understand his way?"
In Augustine's Confessions, it's his story of coming to faith. He was a famous pagan rhetorician. We're finishing up here. He says that, who am I? They ask the question, who am I? Like, I don't. And he said, I don't even know, because like the Apostle Paul says, I want to do the good thing and I don't do that. And the bad thing that I don't want to do, I do those things. Now he's speaking as a Christian here even. He's a contradiction to himself. He's a riddle to himself. Augustine says the same thing. I'm a riddle to myself. And I can't solve the riddle, but who can solve the riddle? Well, you made me, Lord. You know me. You can tell me who I am. It's a matter of revelation. It's revelation here as well, but it's not revealed by the pagan author Sophocles. But the question is asked, and the question is important, and the question will remain important. This is one of the reasons I came to faith, is because I thought I have an answer to a question that everyone in the academic world says they know the answer to, and they're all lying. And logic demonstrates that to me. It's not because I think they're bad people. They might be, but it's more that they can't see the obvious logical fallacy in their position. So maybe I want to consider this Christian thing a little bit more carefully. Anyway, I'll leave you off with that and see you next time.